just gonna start recording. And then let's do live stream, start setting up for YouTube. Just so I can get a link out there. Oh. Where is the alumni relations development is coming in. I guess they're not coming in. They asked to come in. Let's see.
Thank you all for being here. I think we're going to give it a couple more minutes to
Yep.
see if anyone else trickles in.
Yep. All right. And then, so if you guys have questions or anything, you can put them in the chat. Isabella is going to be kind of monitoring that. There's also let me grab a link to the Google form you can send for like kind of a question and that we have the document too. And if you want to share this with anybody, uh, oh, I accidentally shared it to Isabella. Hang on. There you go. So that's the Zoom link for here. Here is the questions. Um, and then can people see, can everyone see Lydia on their screen?
Her head, oh no, it's her head is back.
Okay, cool. Just wanted to make sure. Isabella, mm, I don't think I could pin them. Still very new to to Zoom. Let's see. All right, cool. Beth Kearns. And let's see. Those just joining in the chat, are you able to see the past links I posted
I think usually you can only see
when
the
you join?
when oh, maybe someone's writing. Yes, so
Okay. I thought I hit, there was like an option of, a perpetual chat. So
okay.
just wanted to
Great.
make sure. But I guess it's 7:08, so we'll get started. And if people hang on. Let's see. Uh-oh. I think oh no, never mind. They're good. All right, so we'll get started. So hello everybody. Welcome to our, very random and less professional presentation of Lydia's book on mobility. Um, my name is uh uh My name, sorry, I was distracted by a ping. My name's Erica. I'm one of the admins for the diversity and inclusion community. Myself and Isabella kind of put this together when we found out Lydia was not going to be presenting at Sweetbriar. Um, and we reached out to Lydia. Lydia was super excited, and we were super excited because I'm like, oh, an author responded to me. That's like, I'm so lowly on the totem pole. It's so exciting. Um, and we've been chit-chatting for a few weeks on trying to present this. And so we're really excited to present this to everybody tonight. This is going to be recorded as well, and it's going to be streamed on YouTube, and I will put the link out at the end for anybody. In the chat, there's a Google Docs link for any questions you could submit, so we'll ask. And just a quick announcement is there were a lot of people that offered to donate or wanted to support Lydia in some way because she did return her um, paycheck that Sweetbriar sent her. And so, because of that, um, what we wanted to do was offer some donations. And after finding out what happened with the Bum Chums, and not so if you're not aware, Bum Chums, the tap club or sorority, for those not aware, were not allowed to donate to one of their um, fundraisers that they promoted, which is a fundraiser that supports trans adults and those in the Virginia area. And so after talking with the Bum Chums, they were very open to agree to let us share the donation link. And after talking with Lydia, we'd like to ask any donations you'd like to send to Lydia, consider sending there to support them. And as a Bum Chum, Isabella, I'm going to let them share that link and a little bit of that information for everybody since, they should be able to speak on it. So go ahead, Isabella.
Hi, so I'm just a senior member. I'm technically inactive and I'm graduating this year. But as a bum chum, I just wanted to say thank you, Lydia, and everybody that's supported the bum chums and our mission so far. We think that this is a wonderful idea, and so I'm going to send the link to Tap VA, and that's just so you can have it directly. Feel free to share it to whomever you would like. There should be a section on their website near the donation link to make a note to say whoever you're donating on behalf of. So if you could just indicate that it's the Bum Chums so that we can sort of track that and so you can openly support that, that would be really appreciated. And since we posted the letter, TAP VA has actually already received triple what we would have been able to donate. And so we're really, really grateful and thankful that everybody's able and willing to donate and help fund this amazing organization. So just thank you again for wanting to help us donate to them. And yeah, I'll share the link right now. Let me know if there are any problems with that.
Thanks, Isabella. And thank you, Bum Chums. And just, all the students and student groups still doing everything they can to try and seek representation and speak out and, be the leaders that Sweetbriar has trained us all to be. So with that being said, Lydia, I'd like go forward and introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Lydia Kiesling. My pronouns are she, her. I'm so happy to be here. I want to thank Erica and Isabella for giving me this opportunity and for seizing the moment after the thwarted common read visit to Sweetbriar. And I want to thank, everyone from the student body and the alumni who have been just so incredibly supportive. I felt, a little apprehensive and just bad to let the school down or let the students down when I didn't come to campus, and your response has been so inspiring and just given me so much to think about and be grateful for. So I really appreciate that, and I appreciate you having me here. I started cracking up when I saw my head floating in the in the classroom, so I even got to have a little bit of the experience of being on campus.
Oh no, this isn't a classroom. So this is Pro Throw. This is our dining hall.
Okay.
So
And
this is where everything, this is like the heart of campus. Like you go to Prothrow for the dining hall for the food. There, you go there for meetings, clubs, announcements will be made. On days with celebrations, you'll have tap clubs like hosting banners and or people making announcements, standing on tables during or singing songs. So, everything happens worth of note in Prothrow. So I figured it
oh,
was you know, one of those I felt it was very important for you to be able to speak here. If you couldn't go to Sweetbriar, here's a little bit of it.
thank you. When you were saying Prothrow before, I was like, is that the name of the program you use to put me on the screen?
No,
So
oh, sorry, no.
that shows my ignorance. Okay, well, love to be in Prothrow virtually. I see in the chat the PayPal link isn't working, but Isabella is gonna figure that out. So yeah, this is, not going to be like a formal 45-minute keynote address because I feel like this format doesn't really suit that. And so I my plan is to just, speak a little bit about the book and how I got the idea to write it and a little bit about my kind of trajectory as a writer. And then I would love to take any questions that Erica has or that you have. And it really can be about anything. It does not have to be about the novel itself. It can be about publishing. I've actually heard from a student already about, sort of advice about becoming a writer or entering the field of publishing. And I'm always happy to speak about that. So please, any type of questions. And if you want to, we can also talk about like what's going on at Sweetbriar. I'm happy to, oh, now my head just got bigger. I'm happy to speak about anything. But yeah, I mean, it's really funny that all of this, not funny, haha, but it's interesting that all of this sort of went down around the novel Mobility, because when I wrote that novel, I was really thinking about um, how people sort of do things and participate in systems and go about life without really like letting outside information like perturb them, and without just noticing things. Oh, I already see a question. Wonderful. I will definitely get to that. And so I think people write novels for a few different reasons. There is 100% like a psychological component. I think for any artist, you have something in your psyche that you need to get out. And I have started thinking about them as hairballs, which is not a very elegant description, but it really does sometimes feel like you've got this hairball like inside your psyche and you've got to get it out. And the work of art that you produce is like a way of doing that. And I think, a more eloquent way of putting it is that there are things that we think about and wrestle with, sometimes consciously and sometimes really unconsciously. And that can be things in our own lives and our past histories, how we were raised, things we notice in the world around us. Or they can be broader, kind of noticing like systems and things about the larger world. So there's kind of like the personal hairball piece. Um, and then, yeah, there's the kind of conscious part where you make a decision about what you want to say, what you want to spend your time doing. Writing a novel takes a really long time. It is such like a fanciful thing to do in terms of our kind of market values, that it would be foolish for anyone to just wake up one day and say, I want to write a novel. So you really need to like have something kind of burning that you want to say. um, so it is this process of like both kind of the unconscious, like hairball part, and then the choices you make as an artist about what is the story that you're making, trying to do. And so the kind of hairball part of mobility is that I am a Foreign Service brat. So for those of you who have not read the novel, which could be all of you, and that's totally fine. If I were assigned a novel to read in my college that everyone was assigned to read, there is like a 28% chance that I would have read it. So I will not judge anybody if you haven't gotten to it. But it follows a woman named, her nickname is Bunny, who was born, around the time I was, which is 1984. I believe Bunny, when I actually did the math, she was born like a year or two earlier than I am, but I was. But you know, comes of age in the early 2000s, and it just sort of follows her through from her teenage years into her adult life. And as she starts working in the oil and gas industry, like pretty accidentally, um, and just kind of follows her and asks why, how, what ideas does she grow up with, and how do those ideas kind of affect how she moves through the world? And I'm really interested. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. But so Bunny in the novel is a Foreign Service brat. So that means that her father works for the US State Department, and they move around every so often to different places in the world. And that was my experience. My dad was a Foreign Service officer. So we moved, every 1 to 5 years. And as a consequence, my head keeps getting bigger in the screen. I have to push my computer back. Um, as a consequence of that, I both, had the opportunity to live in a lot of different places and see a lot of different places, which was an immense privilege. And I also went to a boarding school that the federal government paid for, because the federal government will pay your tuition to private school for children of parents who are in that type of work where there's a lot of moving around. And so I went to a school that I would certainly not have gone to, you know, were my parents not in that, or my father not in that line of work. And so I had this, really immense like academic and educational privilege. And despite that, in my adulthood, in my 20s and 30s, especially, I have two children I started, after I had my first child, and just kind of looking at the world around me, it astonished me how surprised I was by sort of basic realities that would be unsurprising to other people. And so I'm sure, I mean, I know because of what I have learned sort of about your campus in the course of this conflict with President Hudson and the board, that, you know, the conversations about kind of privilege and who has the I guess privilege of obliviousness, like who is able to kind of tune things out because it does not directly affect them, and who is innately aware of certain sort of structural injustices and imbalances because it directly affects them. So I think I started writing the novel. It's my second novel. I started writing it around 2017, right before my first novel came out. And it is definitely inflected by sort of the previous like 6 or 7 or 8 years of being an adult and just really understanding and being embarrassed by how surprising it was to me that, you know, things were not okay in the United States, and that it was, you know, built on so much structural inequality um, of all kinds. And so I was interested, I had kind of like a self-loathing and like rage around that time. And I wanted to put it somewhere. And I also wanted to write about the upbringing I had, which is, pretty specific. I think there's certain types of work where, especially work that involves the whole family kind of moving with the person doing the work. Sometimes that's like military brats or people, who I don't know, like are missionaries. They're very like specific jobs that really like inflect the whole the whole family. The culture of the family is sort of built on that type of work. Yes, third culture kids is a really useful term for talking about how a lot of kids grow up in these kinds of families. And so I wanted to write about that, both because it was just, it's on its face, like seemed kind of interesting to me. But I also had, the personal sort of nostalgia for that way of growing up. And part of growing up that way, when you are literally kind of moving around sort of in service of like the project of the United States, and the underlying assumption that your whole family's kind of life is based on is that the United States is a place worth kind of representing overseas, and that its values should be exported around the world, and that it was the rest of the world that kind of needed help getting to where we were. And that's very much the message of the Foreign Service as I remember it in that time. And I know, there are a lot of Foreign Service officers now. It's a very different place. And, I imagine there's been like a lot of, I both imagine and am aware that there has been a lot of evolution in how, Foreign Service officers think about their work. But, um, you know, s- I was really wrestling with that as an adult, and also thinking about the fact that you can, as a foreign service brat, move all over the world, but it doesn't mean that you know anything about the world. You might know a lot more capitals of countries than other kids sort of in your American cohort. You may be able to find places on a map and have tried a lot more different kinds of foods, but there's still a lot of insularity in that type of upbringing. So I was very interested in kind of capturing that and like working through it, and also just like revisiting it a little bit for my own like nostalgic purposes. So that's that like hairball part that I was talking about. Um, and so, I started writing, and I was writing from the perspective of like a teenager, very similar to me, but not me, who whose father was stationed in Azerbaijan. My family had been posted to Yerevan, Armenia, which is Armenia is a neighboring country of Azerbaijan. Armenia in 1997, when we moved there, was very poor after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, whereas Azerbaijan had a lot of poverty, but also had immense oil and gas reserves. And so that fundamentally changed its trajectory after the Soviet Union came apart, because suddenly there were all these people from all over the world sort of descending on Azerbaijan saying, we want to get a piece of this oil and gas that was not kind of open to the world market in the same way during the Soviet Union. So I was I was reading about, because I was thinking I want to write about a foreign service family. I want it to be sort of similar to my experience so that I can draw upon my own experience, but I'm not interested in like writing a memoir and having it match exactly. So that's where research came in. And I was reading a lot about the Caucasus region during that time period and this like big oil rush. And that's when I, started thinking about oil and gas. And so then, the book I thought I was writing, which was just sort of like a personal story, but a pretty like angry and pointless personal story in a sense, started, I finally had something to kind of hook onto that was a little bit like outside of just like this one character's family. And then, I, like many novelists, I sort of like bit off more than I could chew and got completely overwhelmed thinking about how to write a story about oil and gas, because it's such a massive thing that touches so many aspects of our lives. Um, and, I figured that out over like trial and error. It took me, several years to write. But basically, some of the like anger and frustration I had been feeling in my own life, just watching things happen, like, Trump getting elected for the first time. Um, but before that, you know, watching things happen like the murder of Trayvon Martin or Freddie Gray or Michael Brown. So, these things that were happening and giving me that kind of like, oh, the place that I grew up sort of idealizing, living in foreign countries when I was a child, is not that place at all. And yeah, again, that sort of like embarrassing belated realization. but it's very boring to write a novel where it's just like this person realized that injustice happens and that's bad. Like, that's not interesting. It's not interesting to read. I think it's not interesting to read something by an author who's just not actually trying to like create characters who are real and really like wants to spend time with their own character. So the first sort of drafts, the first things I tried to write about from this novel were really kind of sardonic and just like bitter and not enjoyable to read. Like why would anybody want to spend time with these characters if like the author herself is sort of fed up with them already from page one? Like that doesn't work. So I had to like think a lot about how to like just accept my own characters like for who they are, which includes their tremendous flaws, and really try to think honestly about how how a person can be raised in a way where like they are allowed to move through life in a way that like discourages them from taking action, where they can see that something is wrong. And in the case of Bunny, working for the oil and gas industry, knowing that the oil and gas industry is like actively working to quell, an understanding of climate change and, really strong action against it, she can see that, but she's just not able to kind of like step outside of the current. She's letting the current kind of push her along in a way. And I think her gender, race, and class had so much to do with how she was socialized to move through the world, which includes, there's like a certain amount of like ambition and striving, but also not a sense of kind of authority and being empowered to say, hey, this doesn't make sense to me. I'm going to do something different. So I wanted to just follow someone like through life, and put them in situations where that is kind of shows up. And for some people I know, like writers have an interesting relationship with the site Goodreads. I used it with my first novel. I was like, I had to read every single Goodreads review. Like I would be checking and seeing if the number had changed, and I would go and look because it was so interesting. Like you do this, you write a novel by yourself. Like maybe you have one or two other readers, and then, your agent reads it, and then your editor reads it, and like whoever you try to get to blurb the book will read it. But ultimately that's not very many people. Like you just have so little feedback. And then when it actually enters the world and people you don't know are reading it, there is something so fascinating about that. So with my first novel, I was like, oh, I got to read all the Goodreads reviews. With the second one, I started to just feel like, oh, this is kind of self-harm. Like I don't need to know what like this person who just hates my book, I don't need to know about their opinion. It's not my business. And I was noting that, some people with that, like, there are many reasons to not like the book that like could be about the book's quality, and that's totally fine. And people are entitled to that viewpoint, certainly. But it was funny to see some people who just like, you could tell they didn't think that like the lives of women were like interesting subject was like an interesting subject for a novel. And there were people like, oh, why does it name like shoe brands, and like why does it talk about makeup and clothes? And it's just like, if you don't understand why that like matters in this story, I really don't know how to explain that to you. So sometimes it's like not the right book for someone, but ultimately, um yeah, there are people who don't like the book because it isn't really, it doesn't have like a complex story. It just follows a woman and like her uh her jobs. We don't have a lot of representations of just like different jobs in novels, mostly because it's like boring to write about, but it is really important. It's how most people spend their time. Um, and so I did want to capture just like what it's like to enter the job market, especially when you have no skill that like is kind of deemed like inherently marketable, and how people solve that, especially young people who do have, great educations, like the kind of education you are getting at Briar College. Um, and yeah, I wanted to write about like jobs and relationships and how like what one person sort of like how she moved in those spaces. So that's the novel. And yeah, I will open it to questions. Or Erica, if you want to get started with any questions you have.
Yeah, I was actually thinking a lot about how you kind of you touched on this theme of like I guess it's as a human being detached from your environment. And in our modern day, I think it's very easy to be able to navigate the world in this way, to be detached from, you could live in a small town and not have any understanding of the what's going on, the difficulties, the history. And back, I think, 100 years ago, you would not be able to survive very well without having community. But now, one of the themes it seemed like you touched on was like you can survive throughout the world without this sense of understanding and interconnectedness, but it doesn't mean you're going to thrive. Um, how did you kind of decide that, you know what, this thing that we've developed as an issue in society and in culture throughout the world, is going to be like a center point to an extent? At least that's kind of what I got from it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I love that reading. That is very perceptive. And I think the way that I thought about it and sort of, you know, part of part of interconnectedness and part of community is obligation. And I think we are accustomed to thinking of, and by we, I mean, someone who is like raised the way I was, and that obligation is like an unpleasant term. When you have an obligation to do something, it's like a chore, it's tedious,
Mhm.
it's like limiting you in some way. But there's this being in community is like it does obligate you. It obligates you to like help someone when they need help. But in the same way, it obligates them to help you. And yeah, I think Bunny, I mean, one person who I know who read the novel was like, why doesn't Bunny have any friends? And I was like, well, if I write a bunch of friends, like that just it's gonna take me in a
Defeats
lot of it
the
defeats the
purpose.
purpose. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like she is kind of a lone wolf, and part of that is just like convenience. Like I can't be writing like 30 other characters, but also I do think it's a I mean, we talk about like the male loneliness epidemic, but
Hmm.
lots of people feel lonely and lots of people are disconnected and like and are and are surprised, I think, when about what can happen when you do decide to like let yourself be obligated by other people and be connected. And as I've gotten older and especially like I have kids and like my kids were really young during like peak COVID pandemic, the isolation of that was horrible, but also what kind of grew, at least on my block, I was very lucky, like a real sense of community like grew out of that period. And so that's when I was like finishing the novel. Um, and yeah, I was like, I want to show a person who's kind of has the opposite of that, of like, and yeah, like I think her life feels a little, it's not like it's a full life in many ways, but it also but like as a reader, I sort of hope that people are asking like, okay, but what else could be there? Like there is a sense of kind of like something is maybe lost and missed in living the way that Bunny does.
I think that speaks to Sweetbriar, and I think it's funny because there's no way you could know this, but at least my experience at Sweetbriar and the big thing that's been echoed across different generations of Sweetbriar students has been like when you go to Sweetbriar, you can choose to kind of do your own thing and be on your own, and no one's really going to stop you. However, like one of the benefits of Sweetbriar is the community, is a sense of connectedness, is a sense of people from all different backgrounds being able to have conversations and see each other at the same level and work together. And so you speaking on that of there was a common conversation we would have as students where, a new student would come in as a freshman and they would be struggling they wouldn't have a lot of friends or they wouldn't be involved in a lot of stuff. And we would try to talk with them and they're like, well, I don't really want to be involved. And many, many, many colleges allow you to kind of do that. And Sweetbriar, you can, but I feel like one of the benefits of Sweetbriar is that sense of community. I mean, as a trans person going there, um, it was the first place that I felt seen and that I could be myself and not just be the trans person. You know what I mean? Like I'm not the trans girl. I'm Erica. I'm involved in field hockey and lacrosse and I'm doing student government and I'm a chemistry student. Like I'm so many other things. And I feel like that really resonates with a lot of Sweetbriar students knowing Bunny has that difficulty because I think a lot of Sweetbriar students find themselves in that position that they don't aren't sure how to navigate with. I have a question though from a few questions from audience members. First one was from Christina. I'd love to know how you decided upon and researched your setting locations.
Thank you for that question. So my first novel takes place in very rural northeastern California, which is where my mom is from, and it was a town that I lightly fictionalized it, but it was like I knew every corner of the town and like the house, like all sort of from life. And for my second book, I really wanted to stretch my wings a little bit and try to figure out how to write a place I had not seen. And there are, I mean, talk about obligations. Like if you are going to do that, like you have an obligation to be as careful and thoughtful as possible. And, so my basic plan was like, I'm going to research as much as I can and write. And then if I'm able to sell the book, so for fiction, you have to usually have the whole manuscript before you can like sell it to a publisher. With nonfiction, it's different. You can sell a proposal, but fiction, like they don't trust novelists to finish anything. So they like to see the whole thing. And so, I thought, if I sell the novel, then I will be able to go and justify like doing some travel to kind of like affirm my research, like do whatever other research like I need to do. So I'm very lucky that that like plan worked out. But so in the early stages, there are a lot of I tried to use some sort of like unconventional forms of research. And some of that was like finding people's weird old YouTube videos, like of people will just put videos. I ended up writing about this for the New York Times Magazine because I was so interested in this concept. But like, especially around trains and buses, transit enthusiasts will upload to YouTube just like videos of different bus rides and train rides in cities around the world in any decade. And so, I mean, it was amazing. Like, you could just go on people's like little weird video tours from like 1993 in Baku. And so I did things like that. I found people who lived there at the time. Um, I read some memoirs and first person accounts. I read there was like an expat magazine that had been published there that I'm pretty sure was like probably funded by the CIA. I'm still like unsure. And I read like every single article just to kind of get a vibe of like who was there and what were the activities that people were doing. Um, I mean, the first scene of the novel is like a watermelon toss at a 4th of July party. I found that on YouTube. There was like a video of a 4th of July party in Baku. So amazingly useful. So I did things like that. For the Texas part, I was like going deep in Redfin to just like look at what people's houses looked like inside of houses. And then, yeah, when I sold the book, I was fortunate that once I like got paid or knew I was going to get paid, I went and spent a week in Azerbaijan and I spent a few days in Texas and just sort of like got things that I hadn't gotten before. And then my final kind of due diligence is I found someone who was from Azerbaijan and had been grown up there and been like the same age as Bunny at the time that the novel was written. And I just said, "Hey, can I pay you for your time and you read this? And if anything, like do a vibe check. If this is just like not what it felt like, that would be extremely helpful." And and it was great. Like she was, she kind of like it was a great affirmation that I had been, pretty thorough and how I had gone about researching and describing. And she was able to give me like a couple of pointers, like, oh, she would have attracted a lot more attention walking along on the streets, like, and so that was something that was helpful. And I did the same thing. I um, paid an oil scholar to read from the eye of like oil and gas stuff. Did it make sense? Like, had I gotten any, did I have any glaring errors? Because like the nightmare is that someone comes and is like, I'm like an oil and gas, I'm a geologist and I work for Exxon and like this is all wrong.
So you
And
basically like in court allow you involved stakeholders as like in re scientific research we call them stakeholders
mhm.
of you involved the stakeholders that would know if it's right or not, and in a way you gave them autonomy and you gave them a voice by being able to, you know, share or explain or correct or add in, because you can only in that kind of situation I feel like there you can only add good information. You can't really like get bad information if you include the people that you're involving, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, there's always the risk of like, so, sort of like a related practice in the publishing industry is the idea of the sensitivity read.
Hmm.
And especially when people, are writing someone who is outside of their race or gender expression or ethnicity, like a practice that I think is important has come about of, paying someone like from that community to read and sort of with that eye, like, how does this come across? I think the risk, of course, is like assuming that a community is monolithic and that if you have one person's kind of
Yeah.
like sign off that that is going to go for everyone. So, I think it's important to like be, cognizant of the fact that like there's not going to be one person who can just be like, your book is like morally sound and I have given it a stamp and now everything is fine. But like, I think, yeah, that's like a naive view of just human beings
Hmm.
generally. But I do think it is important, like, to just, yeah, like involve other people who know what they're talking about, especially when you are not coming from a place of knowledge. But, would hopefully have gotten to some place of knowledge in the process of like creating the work.
Yeah. So then would you say like journaling has been valuable to your writing? A question from Victoria.
I do not journal. I am sort of horrified by it. I think, well, I used to when I was in high school, and then
Hmm.
like the reality of having like that, like the physical embodiment of all my like horrifying thoughts was so like painful to me, especially because for a while I like lost it, and it turned out it was like floating around my college dorm and just
Mm.
like
There's
never
evidence.
again. Yeah. So I eventually like got it back, but was yeah, I mean, I think I probably should journal. I also am sort of coming out of like my writing career started as being like a freelance writer, like nonfiction writer. So I would write about like books, I would do book reviews and just kind of do like general culture writing. And you get such a like scarcity mindset as a freelancer that the idea of like writing that you're not going to like use in some way is like difficult to wrap your head around, which is horrible. Like from every perspective, it's like that's such like capitalist thinking
No. It's
about
efficiency. My autistic brain is thinking efficiency of like,
yeah.
well, like I do YouTube and I'm like, well, why am I going to play this game or do this thing if I'm not going to record? But then I don't
Hmm.
do anything because I'm not recording. And so it can be detrimental, but I understand. I can empathize with that.
Yeah. So I don't journal, but now when I'm in like a project, which I just started kind of writing my third novel, what will hopefully be my third novel, and I am like trying to be better about when I have a thought that I want to go in the novel, like I write it down in a notebook. So it's like oblique journaling, I guess.
Yeah, it's more like using a whiteboard kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, so then, how and why did you choose the title for your book? And in that same vein, like, how did you kind of, in your own life, reconstruct your like foreign service brat life experience?
Um, well, I thought a lot about just place. I think you end up having like a really weird relationship with place if you move around a lot. And so like there I'm very attached to, so my family did live in Greece. We had two postings there, and my dad still, he left the foreign service and just stayed in Greece at his second posting, so he's been there for 20 some years. And when I was a child, we lived there, and that does appear in the novel, and that's just because like I wanted to like go back, and I wrote those parts in peak like awful like lockdown COVID era. Um and I had been, sort of cooped up with my like toddlers, just miserable for like months and months. I had not worked on my book in 6 months. And then I said, okay, I can't do this. Like, I have to start working on this again. And I was fortunate that I had, my husband like had a flexible work situation. So I said, I am going to leave for 3 nights and like work on my book in the cheapest cabin I can find. And the first thing I did when I got there was write the scenes that were in Greece. And I think part of it was just like a way to be able to get back. So yeah, just like how places kind of imprint on you and feel you have such a strong feeling for them, but they're like not actually your home. Like you're not from there. It's not you can't like claim the place. So yeah, thinking about like kind of what how places like get a hold on you and how you relate to them. But mobility, I would love to be able to claim that that was my idea, but I'm really horrible at titles. And so I was calling the book like the collaborator, like just horrible, like awful. And I told my agent this when when I sent her like a real draft, and she said, okay, yes, this is a book. Like I love this. And she said, what about mobility? And I was like, you're a genius. This is why, this is why you take 15% of my salary and you earn every single piece of it. Like, because I just thought it was a perfect title, like both for, there's the obvious like kind of echo of Exxon Mobil, like that, or Exxon Mobil that like works well. But I think just so much of the book is like how Bunny is moving through the world and how you know, certain things about her allow her like one type of mobility, and how we think about like kind of climbing a ladder in a workplace. And then there's the kind of oil part, which is like how fossil fuels move through the world, like literally just kind of like in pipes, but then also, in the atmosphere, and how they enable like our own mobility and, in very like literal like transportation. So it kind of captured like so many things that I was trying to like wrestle with in the book and never answer, because there's not like answers to many of these quandaries. They're just sort of things to observe and be and like try and understand. So I was so grateful for her for that title, because I do think it is great for the novel.
So,
Oh, and thank you. I see
oh,
JT. It's time for, yep,
yeah.
the bedtime struggle is real. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, and so we're going down to our last about 20-ish minutes. So I wanted to know, and that's kind of most the all the questions that we kind of got. But I wanted to kind of pivot into the Sweetbriar debacle conversation. I'm not sure what to call, like, the Sweetbriar incident, like I'm not sure how to call it, but it's developed a fame kind of on its own in social
Hmm.
media. Sweetbriar vixens are very good on social media of like having conversations. Um oh, Katie has a here, Katie, if you'd like, you can I'll unmute you so you could just ask your questions if you're okay with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
please.
Let's see. There you go. I asked to unmute. There's Katie.
Can you hear me? I have like a bubbling stream right behind me. Okay, I
Oh,
just wanted to
yeah, I
make
hear
sure
you great.
the acoustics are great. Okay, so hi, thank you for being here and thank you for being awesome. Um, so my first of all, I resonated a couple of things. First, your comment about people tuning out the things that may be troubling about the systems in which they're a part. That really resonated with me. I actually live at a boarding school right now. I'm a boarding
Oh,
school
wow.
spouse, and
Amazing.
there have been a number of students over the years who have been part of the Aramco
Hmm.
mafia. They're, Aramco brats, and
Yeah.
they're not a monolith. I want to be very clear about that. But it's always been kind of interesting to me, like the disconnect there between, you know the wealth that they very often display, flaunt in some cases, and the ethics of where that wealth comes from, and also just kind of the apolitical attitudes that I've also just observed. Again, I want to just be clear. I'm trying not to stereotype here, but your comment, going back to your comment about people kind of choosing to ignore certain things, really resonated. So that's my comment more than a question, which I know is kind of annoying. But
No.
I also wanted to ask you though about, Bunny, at least in the beginning of the book, she's kind of like this apolitical, disaffected teenager. And I was just kind of curious, like for you, what was your political awakening? And in this day and age, do teenagers even have an option to be disaffected and apolitical?
Well, I love both the comment and the question. Yes. So, yeah, one of the things that I find so striking thinking about my high school experience is that it's like this amazing education, like just unreal. I went to, a small liberal arts college. I went to Hamilton College after, and my classes in high school were just as good as the ones I had in Hamilton. And that's not because Hamilton classes were not good. It's because it was like a world-class sort of college level coursework that I got to do in my high school. And, a lot of that, like, I've revisited papers, like, we wrote about colonialism. We read books about, like, race and colonialism. And so it's not that the concepts were not made available to us, but it's like we only learned how to dissect them in, like, talking about a novel from the 1800s. It was not ever like, okay, but how does that look in our present day? How does this look in the hallways of our school? How does this look in the way that kids talk to each other and about each other? And the same way for issues of like gender and sexuality. So it was like, so there's just such a strange disconnect. I know that the school is not like that now because I, know people who still like have a connection to it. And I still like, I get the magazine and I look at the magazine and they're just having conversations that were not being had at all in like 1997 to 2001. Um, and and I think that's the thing of it. I do feel, and yeah, so my own political, like I was just like kind of a troll. Like that's how I think of, like I wasn't a good student because I had just clear kind of like mental health and like just stuff going on that was like I was not served by being in that environment and like served no one by being in that environment. Like some dedicated teachers like dragged me through the experience and I was able to graduate, but like it wasn't for me. I just really, really struggled with that very regimented, like you had to wake up really early and sign into breakfast. You had to be good at sports, like just really high pressure, high intensity. I struggled to just like do any of the things that I was expected to do. Um, and also like I will give myself a little bit of like teenage credit of I don't think I had the language for it, but I did have a little bit of the like, this is phony. Like we talk about like kind of goodness and like having like good morals in this school, but it's like kind of like bullshit in a way. I had no way to like articulate that in a positive, like productive way, but I do think I had like some awareness of it. But yeah, I mean, um, it like a lot of things were just a joke to like me and my friends, like because they didn't touch our lives. And like, that was the water we swam in. Like when I look at, movies that were popular at the time or like magazines or some of the books, like some of the like the websites that we read, like I have to give myself a little grace for like being, a kid like with all of these messages around me, but like just pretty like shocking and shitty to like look back at the type of like cultural products that we were like freely consuming.
I
And
think, oh, go ahead.
and so yeah, then like in college, the Iraq war began and I was like, well, this is not right. But knowing that this was not right did not it did not like confer on me an obligation to do anything. And in fact, I had a sense, like such a cynicism at that age, that like there was nothing that you could do. Like it was just going to happen. And not everyone was like that. Like there were people who were like activists who were in my cohort, not a ton at the places where I went to school, but like people were in the streets and there were young people in the streets. It's just like I was smoking cigarettes being like, well, this sucks. Like everything is fucked. So that was like my, and yeah, it's been much later in life that I have felt obligation in like different ways. But yeah, I do think like today's youth is exposed to a lot more, but like, I don't know. Sometimes I hear like, I read online somewhere, it was like someone was writing about raising like teen boys, and like the teen boys are still apparently like all calling each other gay, as that, or like saying like that's gay, like, which is like, I really was like, oh, we're past that, because my kids are going to public school in Portland, Oregon, and that is not what people are saying. Like they do not say that, but like in other places, like that's not the case. That's still like the language hasn't changed that much. Like,
I think
and
we forget
I
that the United States is the size of Europe. And so like there are cultural changes. Like when you go from state to state, it's not like if you come from California to Virginia, or hell, I'm from Pennsylvania in a small town to like a big city. It's very, very different. And one of the things I noticed going to Sweetbriar as an older student was that I was like, man, these freaking kids are like way more aware and involved. I was like when I was 18, 19 years old, like I was like getting drunk and like going to parties, playing video games, just not caring. And like if something was happening, like, oh, that's what adults take care of. That's what professionals take care of. Whereas now, like literally you go onto a campus like Sweetbriar, and I mean, look at like people like Isabella and all these other students that do all this work. Like so much work and so much passion. And I think somewhere along the way, we accidentally were like, hey guys, you should get involved. And they were like, all right, cool. You're willing to hear what I have to say, And I don't know. I think it is changing, but I think it's kind of just like, I don't know. I went to high school in the 90s or the 2000s, and it was very different than I
yeah.
think now. But I think we have the ability, people online have that ability to say something on a post and feel heard without being told you're just a kid.
Yeah.
So I don't know, like I don't, but that was just kind of where I saw it. We had a comment from Beverly. I'm gonna let Beverly kind of speak real quick, and then after that, I'll discuss a quick thing with Super with you, so we could let you go. All right. So go ahead, Beverly. You should be able to.
Okay. Oh, okay. No, wait.
Hello, I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Oh, because my screen says the host is not allowing participants to unmute themselves. So I'm okay. I'll click OK. First of all, I just want to say I very much enjoyed reading your book.
Oh, thank you.
And having worked for the Federal Energy Administration and later the Department of Energy from 1975 to 1997, I was impressed with the dirt you had on the oil and gas industry. I thought it was very well done.
That's like the best validation. Thank you.
And also I grew up in Houston, so that aspect had some familiarity too. My father sold tubular goods to the oil companies, everybody from the big guys to the little guys. So
Amazing.
that was a very familiar thing to me.
My father is also from Houston, so that's the like his side of the family that all is that's where that comes from.
Mhm. Okay. Well, thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Beverly.
Thank you.
So to kind of wrap up, so yeah, the Sweetbriar, actually it was a good segue from Katie and Beverly's comments, because Sweetbriar is not you know, um is not distance from controversy, but like with this new admissions thing, a huge amount of alums and students spoke out, and we're trying to speak to this administration and feel heard. And, as someone helping run this organization that was trying to advocate, There was a small group of like 10, 15 people that were for the policy and everyone else was kind of against it. And then we kind of, for a long time, after they were like, nope, we've codified this into like state law, we kind of felt defeated. And all of a sudden, here comes an author that's supposed to do common read, and they're like, send out this letter. I remember logging in and be like, who is this person and how can I talk to them? So like, what did you know going into the Sweetbriar stuff? Um, how were you contacted? Like when you originally agreed to come, what was your expectation? And do you regret or decision or would you change it or,
Well, I love those questions. So yeah, I was contacted like in the spring of last year by amazing English creative writing faculty member Erica Traybold.
yeah, I was gonna say not me.
Yeah, no, different Erica. Um, and and Kathleen Placidy. I'm not sure how you pronounce her last name. And they said, hey, you are like one of the finalists for being a Sweetbriar Common Read. Would you consider coming to our campus? And, what type of like honorarium would you ask for? And this is what it would look like for you to come. And I said, oh my God, that's amazing. And so I kind of like, I kind of lowballed based on like what I kind of heard from other people. Because I really wanted to do it. I really wanted them to pick my book because that's a huge honor. And like for them to buy 500 copies of the book is a really big deal. Um, and yeah, then, I didn't, and then they wrote and said, great, we picked you. Like, we're going to talk with your publisher about ordering the book. And then I just like, that was it. And so I put it on the calendar for the following year and like basically forgot about it. And I had heard of Sweetbriar before. My husband is from Virginia. He went to UVA. He grew up in the Hampton Roads area. Um, he's from Chesapeake. So I, I'm familiar with like a bit of like the landscape of Virginia, like educational institutions. So I knew what Sweetbriar was. Um, and I felt like that's all the information I need. Everything like seems great. But yeah, then it was right before I was supposed to go. That's when I sat down to like write the keynote. And actually the thing like it's goofy that this is how it transpired, but I was thinking, I was thinking about talking about Bunny and like how kind of like shapes gender is something I'm really interested in thinking about and patriarchy. Um, and I was like, well, yeah, I guess that makes sense for me to talk about like here in this context, it's a women's college. But then I was like, well, women's colleges like I know they probably have like broader admissions now. Like let me not be like let me be inclusive in my language when I'm talking to this audience because I actually don't know that I'm going to be saying oh all of you like young women. So I like Google Sweetbriar like non-binary students to be like what and like honestly I hadn't and talk about like being oblivious and like what sort of privilege allows you to not think about. I just like really hadn't thought about how I just assume women's college was like anybody who wants to go to a women's college, it's such a self-selecting like group that it just wouldn't really come up. And I didn't go to a women's college, so I just like haven't thought that much about this. But then the first thing that comes up is like all these news articles. And I was expecting that I would like Google Sweetbriar non-binary students and it would be like, we have non-binary students at Sweetbriar. But instead it was like, non-binary students are banned at Sweetbriar. And as soon, like, I didn't even have to like click on any of the articles. Like, I just saw the row of them and my stomach dropped. And I was like, well, I can't go to this fucking school. And then I, clicked and then I was like, okay, well, let me actually read like what's going on. Um, and yeah, there was like thorough reporting about how just shitty it was.
Mhm.
And yeah, it felt like pretty clear that I just, I was going to say like, especially now, like, but I don't think there was like a time that I would have been like, well, now it feels fine. I don't know. There was like, it was the freshness, like it had just happened and it was such like still felt like a current news thing. It was still something the school was going through. Like, it felt active in a way that I was like, oh, like no, I don't want to like be part of that. And yeah, then I called Kathleen that night, and she was very gracious. And I just said I want like I'm not coming. Heads up, I'm going to be writing to the president and board, and yeah, and then it went from there. And I have not regretted it 1 second. I mean, like you worry about, I did sit with myself for a second and say, okay, well, is it better for me to go and like talk about this? And I did consider that as like an option, that I would go and, my speech would like be about this policy and how it's terrible. But I didn't really trust myself. I think, talking about like how we're socialized and kind of like, I think, women are socialized to like not make a stink, and it's like much harder to make a stink like in person, and to just like I was like trying to picture how I would like arrive making a stink and just like maintain the stink throughout, and like that's not like it just didn't really seem possible. So I was like it's going to be more impactful if I just don't come. um and yeah, so I like wrestled with that a little bit, but not for very long. And then the response I got was so overwhelming that I felt like it was the right thing to do. Um and just at least to like renew some, to just give a little friction for the board and the president, because they should continue to feel like discomfort at this, like if it doesn't hurt them, if they don't feel any friction, like they just can keep going with it.
And that's kind of what was happening, was the only people that were offering friction were students and alums. And to them, it was like this, the way this administration kind of seems to be is that like they will say they're going to listen, but then, it just seems like they heard you, but they weren't listening or giving weight to anything that you had to say. It's at like valuing the stakeholders that are a part of this decision. And so having somebody from the outside that just decided, hey, this isn't right, and I'm going to use my rights to speak for a community that's being silenced, I think was so impactful. I've had the amount of people that have, like, you've been again the talk of the town, um, consistently, and I know there's so many people now that are see you in a certain way, and it brings legitimacy, I think, to what you're saying in your book, because kind of like what you said of, if you're writing this book on these kind of topics, how can you expect people to take that seriously when you don't follow your own, it's like practice what you preach, you know what I mean?
yeah, I mean, and I do think like once you have like, so I was telling Erica that I'm doing an event later tonight with the author Sarah Schulman, who has a new book out called The Fantasy and Necessity of Solidarity. Um, and it's really about this. It's just like how to be in solidarity with people who are different from you, who have like different things that they're dealing with. And how, yeah, it's like messy because sometimes like our forms of showing solidarity are imperfect, and like our methods and motivations, but it's still like a worthwhile project because, yeah, like we are obligated. And I don't know, I think we all need each other, and we never know when we'll need each other, but we do.
Yeah. So I know you have to get going to your next thing. So I just wanted to, on behalf of everyone here, the Sweetbriar Inclusion and Diversity Community Group, and just honestly, so many people that their voices are not heard, thank you so much. Everyone, if you can, I would strongly recommend purchase Lydia's book, or her other art books. Share it, get other people to read it, hear their message, and yeah, let me know if you'd like to hear from Lydia again. I don't know. We could do more stuff like this, but any final words, Lydia, before I let everybody go?
No, thank you all so much. And honestly, like feel free to email me anytime, if you have questions, or, if you have questions about
You want to
writing or
drop your email
publishing.
in the
Yeah,
chat?
it's just my How do I do it to the group? Oh, meeting group chat. Okay.
Mm.
It's just my first and last name at Gmail. And yeah, I really have. It's just one thing that's been great about this is that I feel like I have more connection now to Sweetbriar than I would have had I actually like gone to the campus and done my like 1 day little spiel and just like we would all have like forgotten about each other. But I'm like feel personally invested in Sweetbriar in like a different way and have been so impressed with all the people I've met and what an amazing community you have and how you are fighting for each other. And I love it. And thank you so much.
No, thank you. And for everybody, this is going to be recorded. I will be putting the link for the VOD on the Facebook group. Feel free to share it to whoever. We're not gatekeeping who can see this or who wants to. And if you ever want to reach out to Lydia, there's that email. And if you'd like to donate on behalf of Lydia or the Bum Chums, please look at the link in chat. And other than that, have a good night, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.